Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Ask an Expert online chat series, Pathways into Teaching. I'm Elizabeth Greninger. I'll be facilitating today's webinar for the next hour or so. And joining me today is Anna Menezes from the New Teacher Project. Before I do a formal introduction of Anna and her background, I'd like to find out a little bit about who's joining us today and whether you attended our 2013 webinar on this same topic. You'll see a poll come up on your screen, and we'd like you to select the option that best fits the role you serve. Looks like this is a new group, so you'll be learning a bit about what we talked about last year in last year's webinar and some new pieces of information. And it looks like we have a relatively small audience today, but represented by folks who are primarily not in school. So I think anyone in the audience will find something useful to take away. Our goal is to meet your needs. So if you have questions, please use the parking lot or use our polls to ask questions, and we'll make sure those get answered in the time we're together today. Okay, so at this time I'll introduce formally Anna Menezes. She is currently the Vice President of New Teacher Effectiveness. She oversees the Teacher Training Department at the New Teacher Project. Previously, she led the development and implementation of TNTP's Fast Start Teacher Training Model. She worked with districts and charter schools across the country to build a pipeline of strong new teachers. And she recruited and trained hundreds of teachers for New Orleans Public Schools as the site manager for TNTP's Teach NOLA program. At this time, I will pass it along to Anna.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank everybody for having me today. From both research and your own experiences, you know that teachers are the most important in-school factor influencing student achievement. You also know that many teachers often struggle early in their careers, particularly in their first year. That's why teacher preparation is such an important topic when it comes to improving the overall performance and quality of our teaching force. And as a field, we need to continually ask ourselves how we can better prepare teachers to be successful from day one. That's why I'm particularly excited for our conversation today and for you all inviting me to speak on this topic. Of course, teacher preparation is part of a much larger system, and pathways can vary quite a bit. Some pathways can be very selective and require strong academic qualifications of candidates. Others might provide very strong professional development well into a candidate's career in the classroom. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into teacher preparation and engage in what I hope is a thoughtful and meaningful discussion for you about how your own experiences reflect the national research, and so I can share my work with you at TNTP. So we're going to do three things. I'm going to provide you with some overview information, particularly around the types of pathways and the research. I'm going to share with you our approach at TNTP, as well as some other innovative approaches to teacher preparation. And then we're going to have a broader conversation about strategies to improve teacher preparation and ask you to name some next steps coming out of this conversation to take back into your own work. I'm really looking forward to your questions and comments over the parking lot. So I hope that you'll use that to engage in the conversation with me and Elizabeth today. So let's start with the different types of pathways. As you know, there's some different pathways into teaching. And while there's many differences in design, we can largely bucket pathways into three distinct paths: traditional, residency, and alternative. You're probably most familiar with traditional university-based programs, which actually prepare the vast majority of teachers across the U.S. In these programs, participants complete their coursework before they start teaching. Alternative pathways, on the other hand, now account for about a third of all teacher preparation programs nationally. And in some states like Texas, they supply over half of all new teachers each year. They can be run by universities, by nonprofits, and even school districts and charter schools. And while these programs vary a tremendous amount program to program, generally, we can say that coursework is often completed concurrently to being a teacher of record. And in many cases, there is an intensive summer program prior to beginning for a new teacher beginning their first year. And then finally, we have residency programs. Some say that these are a little bit of a hybrid between a traditional and an alternative program. They can also be run by a variety of organizations, though they are most typically run by school districts in partnerships with a university or a nonprofit partner. Coursework generally takes place during a residency year before a teacher fully takes on the full responsibilities of teaching. Over the last decade, in particular, there's been a lot of research on the effectiveness of each pathway. So, what does this research tell us? Well, I would say that the research findings are mixed. But when we look at the level of rigor, and we look at the most rigorous research available, meaning when we look at large-scale research with randomized and control setups, we find that alternative routes to teaching are no less effective than traditional programs. And what I think this means for us is that instead of focusing on which type of pathway is better, it's actually much more productive to focus on the characteristics of effective programs and focus on moving the entire field, regardless of pathway type, towards high-quality preparation for all teachers. Elizabeth?
Yes. So now we want to open it up, and you've had a little bit of the overview of the different teacher pathways, and we're interested in finding out from our audience members today how that research on teaching pathways aligns with your experience with teacher preparation in your school, district, or state. And so we're going to be putting up a poll, and we'll allow you to type in your response. We'll give you a few moments to do that. And I'll just give a little anecdote while we're waiting for folks to respond. Having worked in both New York State and Texas and now Virginia, I've seen a pretty wide variation in teacher preparation programs and routes. Many people may know, and Anna, you probably know this yourself, Texas is actually one of the states that is almost equal, or the alternative routes are surpassing the traditional. So they're kind of breaking what tradition has shown us of how teachers are prepared. And so this is really forcing folks to reevaluate, like you said, the focus on the quality of programming, not necessarily focusing on which route is better.
Elizabeth, I think that's right. I think that in certain places like Texas, we see a large, actually now a majority of teachers coming from alternate routes to teaching. There's a little bit of an anomaly in those states. The majority of teachers still come from traditional university-based programs. But I think what their research is showing us is that we should really focus our efforts and our conversations on characteristics of strong programs, regardless of pathway type. And in doing so, we can strengthen both our alternative routes to teaching programs and our traditional programs.
And it looks like some of our folks on the line today, they're most familiar with the college route. So they'll be learning a little bit about alternative routes today.
Yep, that's right. And I think one of the things that we know from alternate routes to teaching is that they began to address a real need, particularly in urban districts and particularly to help staff hard-to-staff positions. And so while different alternate route programs vary a great deal in terms of design and even purpose, we have programs out there that are particularly designed to work in partnerships with districts where staffing has been more of a challenge, or where particular types of content areas, for example, have also been challenging to fill. When I share more about our work at TNTP, that's certainly been how we've approached our work.
And it looks, Valerie here is making a comment about teacher cadet into college. I'm not familiar with that, and I don't know, Anna, if you are.
I'm actually not familiar with it either.
So Valerie, if you'd like to type a brief response and give us a little more info on that, we would love it, and I'm sure others in the audience would as well. And Nicole comments that, you know, it's interesting. Always the public has opinions on schools, no matter what we're talking about. So it's interesting to see what people's perceptions of teacher preparation are. I think that's a great point.
Agreed.
Oh, okay. That's actually what I was thinking, Valerie, that it might be some type of growing teachers from the high school level.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you mentioned this, Valerie, as well. I think that that's an emerging area where I've seen more and more teacher preparation programs or even districts thinking about how can we go even back further than university level and into high schools to think about how do we make teaching an exciting profession for high school students to consider and get them really excited and invested earlier on in the idea of becoming a teacher. So I will make sure to do a little bit of research on the teacher cadet program because it sounds like it may be really interesting to learn more about their approach.
I think it also aligns with this notion that getting folks who are in the communities where you have a need is really important. So a lot of these programs where we're taking paraprofessionals or aides, someone who's already currently working in a school system and helping them become certified. These are all good ways to build up your teaching force and getting folks who are going to commit to working in the communities where the biggest need is.
Absolutely. I think that's certainly, Elizabeth, as you shared, I've done a lot of work in New Orleans. I'm based and live here in New Orleans, and that's certainly something we've talked a lot about. How can we make sure that there's a local pipeline in the city for talented individuals, particularly those who are working in schools already to become certified. And I think alternate routes or programs like Teacher Cadet into College, for example, have tremendous promise in that way.
Okay, it looked like Steve was maybe going to make a comment. We're going to slide this poll off, and if folks have continued conversation, feel free to write in the parking lot. We're going to move along into the next section and learn a little bit more about the new teacher projects approach.
Absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth. So TNTP was founded in 1997. To date, we've trained over 30,000 new teachers, the majority of whom are career changers through our alternate route to teaching program. We primarily prepare teaching fellows to teach in high-need schools, and most of our programs recruit teachers specifically to work in hard-to-staff subjects like math and science and special education. All of our programs are run in partnership with local school districts or charter organizations. So there's three aspects of our approach that I would love to highlight to you all today. First, we're a selective pathway into teaching. In 2013, we received over 28,000 applications for about 2,000 spots. But even given the selectivity, we know that no selection model is perfect, which is why our programs place a lot of emphasis on an intensive pre-service training, which we really view as a last step in the selection model. Second, we offer, prior to the first year of teaching, an intensive 5-week pre-service training that has really classroom-centered coursework with a sharp focus on core skills. Elizabeth mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that we had recently redesigned that approach, and that we now call that Fast Start, our approach. And what it means is that we want to make sure that our teachers begin their careers having mastered the most essential teaching skills new teachers need to have in order to be effective right away. Our Fast Start model is currently in use in all of our Teaching Fellows programs, and we've begun to actually work with some districts to apply some of the Fast Start principles to new teacher induction and coaching work that districts are doing on their own. But Fast Start really differs from our old model and from many teacher preparation models in 3 ways. First, there's a really narrow focus, particularly early on a curriculum that is about the essential core skills of teaching. The second is that we have an emphasis on practicing skills. So our training includes things like discussion, for example, but the heart of our training is active practice, repeated practice on the core skills. And then third, we provide intensive coaching both during the pre-service training and throughout a teacher's first year that really emphasizes immediate feedback so that teachers can improve their instructional techniques really quickly. And then finally, over their first year of teaching, there's 3 things that happen. The first is that we continue to support and train teachers over their first year. We have a coaching model that we built that really focuses on identifying areas for improvement, setting measurable goals, in-class observations, debriefs, and classroom technique training sessions. And we've done a lot of data on this and data analysis on this and found that teachers who actually received the full year of coaching outperformed their peers who did not. Second, teachers attend additional coursework and training. This coursework and training is really focused on content pedagogy and becoming real masters of the craft of teaching. And then the third is that we hold ourselves accountable to producing teachers capable of consistently giving results for kids. And so our program is a performance-based program. At the end of a teacher's first year of teaching, they go through an evaluative process called the Assessment of Classroom Effectiveness, and it uses multiple measures to continually assess teacher performance. We use the evidence from this assessment or evaluation system to both provide feedback throughout the year, but to also make sure that as we're recommending teachers for certification, that we're recommending teachers who demonstrate clear evidence of effectiveness and potential to improve teacher student achievement.
Anna, this is a good time for me to jump in. I'm sure you were busy delivering that great piece of information, but we have a question that actually really closely relates to that last piece you were talking about. Let me get back up there. Chad was asking about, he said there are a number of pathways that lead individuals toward becoming teachers, but what is the research illustrating around the necessary pathways to retain, develop, and expand the influence of effective teachers? So I think this leads to some of what you're finding with New Teacher Project is that it's really important to evaluate the effectiveness before you send teachers past certain points in your program. Can maybe you talk a little bit more about that in reference to his question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Chad, and something we've been thinking a lot about. The research on teacher effectiveness tells us that the most predictive way to know whether a teacher will be effective in the future is whether they've been effective in the past. And that makes a lot of sense. So past performance really predicts and helps us know how a teacher might perform in the future. So that means that from a teacher preparation angle, the information that we have very early on in the teacher's career is incredibly important. And so during our pre-service training program, for example, we have a really clear performance bar because we work in partnerships with districts and schools who have a need for really high-quality first-year teachers. And if there's any teachers that don't meet that bar at pre-service, we actually don't give them the privilege to start that first year. We want to put folks in the classroom that first year who have the most potential to be effective. So that's one way that we look at performance and think about how do we make sure that we're putting the folks in classrooms, on day one with the most potential to do great things for kids. And then this idea, Elizabeth, that you mentioned that we really should think about teacher preparation not as the thing that happens before teachers get into classrooms only, but it's that and the type of support and development that teachers need in order to continue to grow. We know from research that teachers actually grow substantially between their first and third years of instruction. And that is a fairly large and steep curve that they go through. And so we really need to think about preparation in a way that is going to really push teachers as much as we possibly can in those early years. And unfortunately, we have lots of barriers to that. Support can be expensive, for example, for districts to undertake, or some preparation programs don't have the capacity and ability to support a teacher once they're in the classroom. And later on, we'll talk about some strategies that we can take to improve teacher preparation as a whole. And my number one recommendation would be to continue supporting and developing teachers well into their time in the classroom, to not let it stop on day one.
Thanks, Anna. I think that was helpful and definitely relevant to what you were just discussing. I do know there are a couple other parking lot questions that may take a bit of time to respond to, so I don't want to hold us up at this point, but we will get back to those for Steve and Greg, who I know had questions. So I'm going to let you, Anna, continue on with the next slide.
Absolutely. And here I'm just highlighting a couple of results that we've had from our own programs. Like I said, there's been a lot of research on alternative pathways and traditional pathways as well. A couple of the studies that I'll highlight here just show some of the findings from our own programs. In general, saying that, our teaching fellows are making a meaningful difference in students' lives. But I'll be honest and say that when we look at these results, while we're very proud of the work that we've done, we know that we need to continually push ourselves to improve our training and preparation programs, especially given the more rigorous expectations for student learning, which are playing out as many states adopt the new Common Core standards. So we're really closely looking at the performance of our teaching fellows across our different sites, really seeing the impact that they're making on student achievement, really going back to our own training models and thinking about how can we use this data to really improve what we're doing, and really being proactive about making sure that as the expectations for student learning increase in many states who have adopted the new standards, that we're doing the same for the expectations that we have for our new teachers. Of course, there are lots of other countless examples of other programs of every type: alternative route, traditional, residency, doing innovative work in teacher preparation. I highlighted a few here that I think are doing particularly interesting work. At the University of Washington, they have a partnership with Teach for America. And one of the things that I really appreciate about their program is the extent that they put content knowledge and pedagogy front and center in all of their training, and how they've used coaching through almost all virtual coaching to really provide teachers with ongoing support. At Michigan State, we have programs that require candidates to spend a year after graduation in an internship program to gain even more experience in classrooms before becoming a teacher of record. This emphasis on practice-based development, I think, is really important. It's a nice example of Michigan really asking teachers to spend even more time. And then the Urban Teacher Center is a really interesting partnership between a nonprofit, the Urban Teaching Center being a nonprofit, a university, Leicester University, charter schools, and 2 large districts, both District of Columbia Public Schools and Baltimore Public Schools. And they've all partnered to do a 4-year performance-based residency program where candidates gradually take on increasing responsibilities as a teacher, but also have to demonstrate that they're ready for those increased responsibilities over time. And I'm sure that you've had a variety of experiences with teacher preparation programs as well, and we're really eager to hear more about those.
Anna, this is probably a great time to talk about Steve's question, and he asked this in the parking lot a little while ago. He mentions that to be a profession might run counter to the alternate pathway model. How many professions have that kind of model? And lawyers and doctors take more traditional residential routes. The data may show that alternate pathways are effective, but they don't foster the professional aspect. So I think what you just described, this variation in types of programs and the ways that some of our residential programs and different alternate programs are evolving to ensure that some of those components in the professional practice development is really there. It seems that folks are paying attention to this, but I'll let you speak more to that since you're the expert.
I think to Steve's question on how many professions have this kind of alternate model, I'm not sure, so I'm happy to look up some of that data and sort of report back. But certainly I think that when we look at professions like legal work and lawyers and doctors, you see that more traditional or residential route, as Steve says. And I think residency programs are a really good example of how teaching, the teaching profession and teaching preparation has also led that, gone in that direction. I think there are some challenges with residency programs, so you might ask, like, why don't we have more of them? And I think there are some challenges there. As you can imagine, they're actually very expensive because of the amount of time that candidates are spending in classrooms and not being a full teacher of record. So oftentimes districts have a hard time actually launching those types of partnerships. And then they take a long time for a candidate to go through. And oftentimes that doesn't meet some of the urgent needs that some districts have. And so I think that it's really encouraging to see different residency programs pop up. And my, my take on this is that we should have lots of different pathways into teaching so that folks can find the pathway that works best for them. And then districts and schools as sort of receivers of those teachers should really monitor and think about how well those teachers are doing in the classroom, and should make sure that they're hiring teachers that are coming from, looking at their teachers and saying, like, wow, like, this is a great teacher. We're getting all of these great teachers from the University of Michigan. Let's make sure that we're hiring as many teachers as we can from the University of Michigan. And so I also think there's, on the demand side, making sure that districts and schools are paying attention to where their teachers are coming from, and making sure that they're hiring teachers from those pathways that seem to be producing their best new teachers on their campuses.
That's an excellent point, and I know one we discussed in last year's webinar was that notion of connecting between the pathways and the recipients, so ensuring that the needs are being met on both sides. So at this time, we would like to ask participants to take a look at the guiding question. We're interested in finding out about, from your experience, what characteristics of strong teacher preparation programs have you seen? So we'll put up another poll, and we'll ask folks to respond to that question there. And maybe while folks are answering that, we can go to Greg's question. Greg's talking about, with the different pathways, oh, my thing's jumping around. Oh, might it make sense to affiliate and collaborate with the state quality award program? And this would help school leaders learn about continuous improvement, root cause, and organizational improvement. This is an interesting thought, and I don't know if you have any experience with this or have any insight into this, Anna?
I don't know if I have a ton of insight into it. I do know that states are more and more monitoring the performance of different teacher pathways. So in states like Tennessee and Louisiana, for example, the state actually monitors the performance of different pathways, looking at the performance of the teacher candidates once they are in classrooms, looking at the makeup and demographic and how well those teaching pipelines are meeting district needs. And are actually publicly saying and sort of laying out that data. And I think that that certainly helps build some of the transparency that we were talking about and helping build those connections between the districts and schools who hire teachers and the preparation programs that prepare teachers.
Thanks for that response. I think looking over to our responses to the question, seeing a little bit of commonality here in collaboration, climate, and some of these kind of ways that we bring people together over the experience of learning about the practice.
Yep, and I was just reading through these characteristics as well, Elizabeth, and one thing that struck me was Renee's comment around making sure that preparation programs prepare teachers to have strong classroom management routines and systems and environments, and making sure that they're able to meet a wide, diverse set of student needs. I think that's something we've learned in our own work at TNTP, training teachers and first-year teachers for a long time. We heard so often from our own teachers that they didn't feel adequately prepared to manage their classroom, and that it took them so long to do that that they then floundered on some of the more advanced teaching skills around pedagogy and inquiry-based practice and so forth. And so one of the things we did is when we redesigned and retooled our program is that we focused on some core teaching skills that teachers need right off the bat. And many of those are actually around setting up a great classroom with clear expectations for kids and routines, and giving teachers lots of techniques and things in their toolbox so that they can manage student behavior. And in doing so for the purpose of rigorous academics. And so I think that that's something that, as we've talked to other teacher preparation programs about, this idea of focusing, there's so much that new teachers need to learn. And sometimes we err on the side of trying to help them know everything. And so this idea of focusing and prioritizing can be really powerful. Focusing, prioritizing, and I should say sequencing skills and experiences so that you're building teachers up over time versus potentially giving them a lot to something that's very wide but not knowledge that's very deep.
And that ties in a little bit to some of the comments here, balancing the pedagogy and the content knowledge and making sure that there's both represented. Can you talk a little bit about how TNTP focuses on the content piece?
Absolutely. So this has been an area where we focused a lot, particularly in the last few years of our work. So early on in a teacher's experience, we placed a lot of emphasis on management techniques, but we place an equal focus on having a very clear content-specific vision for what grade instruction looks like, in particular grades and content areas. So a teacher starting off as an early elementary teacher would have a very clear picture of what grade literacy instruction looks like in a K-2 classroom, sometimes even a narrower band than that, a very keen picture of that in mathematics as well. What should a teacher be doing? What should students be doing in those classrooms have seen lots of videos of those, have clear language around that. And it's from there that we then build the content and pedagogical expertise. We find that helping teachers build that bigger picture understanding of what should it look like when this is done well is really critical to then honing in on specific pedagogical practices that they need. And we also focus on a teacher's own content knowledge. We're fairly lucky that in our Teaching Fellows programs, by recruiting mid-career professionals, we often, particularly in the STEM, content areas, we find folks that have a very rich content background. But we still find that we need to help folks understand how to translate their strong content expertise into really high quality instruction for kids. And so we spend a lot of time in the summer, but then particularly over the course of the first year of teaching on content specific pedagogical practices.
There's another question Renee's asking in the parking lot, and also we got a similar question in our registration, and it might be a great time to talk a little bit about dealing with a diverse population. Renee specifically refers to students with behavioral issues, but I would make this question a little more broad at this point to think about how teacher preparation can address all of the needs of the wide variety of students we have in our classrooms, and maybe specifically what you think are some strategies, and I know we're going to get a little bit into this, so I don't want to steal the thunder from the next part, but talking a little bit about how do we approach this knowing that the classrooms that teachers are going to go to are very diverse?
Yep. So I think, I think the reality is that today's classrooms can be really challenging for particularly beginning teachers who are walking in with sometimes a limited toolkit. And I think one of the reasons why we choose to focus on classroom management systems, routines, and techniques very early on in the teacher's sort of preparation is because we knew that if those things weren't in place, then that could certainly escalate into behavior from students that would be more aggressive and cause significant number of problems in the classroom, which really then diminish a teacher's capacity to implement rigorous instruction, which is really the end game in all of this. And so we really emphasize in our own training, and I think many other programs do as well, both this idea of building strong classrooms that have really positive but clear expectations for student behavior, but also building relationships with students and making sure that that relationship is authentic and that the teacher is understanding where that student is coming from, what they bring to this, and fostering a relationship of trust between the student and the teacher. That's really key and can sometimes get lost in all of this. And there's actual ways that you can teach new teacher candidates how to build strong relationships with students, just like there are ways to teach teacher candidates how to bring a strong classroom culture that goes beyond what we typically see, which is, create your rules, create your consequences, post them up. Even when I started teaching, being told don't smile the first month of school. There's a lot of sort of advice or work that is done at the management side that is at the 10,000 foot level, and what teachers really need is practical techniques and strategies. And so I think, Elizabeth, to your second question, sort of what are some strategies? I would say that there's a lot of different strategies on how to manage classrooms and manage student behavior and foster relationships with kids. And I'd be happy to name a few of them, but I would really miss if I said that the problem is, to me, is not necessarily a lack of strategies, but a way in which we often prepare teacher candidates, meaning that we often assume that just because they know it, they can do it. We call this the know it, do it gap, because we used to see this all the time. We used to tell candidates, oh, you have to have very clear expectations, and they would all nod their heads, and then we would go into classrooms and be like, where were those clear expectations? Here's an opportunity to really reset them, for example, and not see candidates do it, and we sort of fell into this place, and folks have called it other things, where we just assume that if somebody knows it, that they can do it. And that's certainly not the case. Teaching in many ways requires really complex skills, and we need to give teacher candidates a lot of practice and feedback on those skills, and not assume that just because they understand what it should look like, or they understand what something is, means that they can actually execute it. That the execution is actually the hardest part in all of this. And we need to make sure that our preparation programs are really providing folks with a lot of support on the execution part of this work.
Very nice point, and I love that notion of the know it, do it gap, and this idea that really until they get into a classroom and they have ownership over that instruction, that is where a lot of the learning does have to take place. So supporting them through that part of the learning process is critical. I think
Absolutely.
Residential programs are finding more success because they're allowing for that time to have people in the situation, and they're not just learning about it and abstractly thinking, but actually applying what they've learned.
Absolutely, and I would say even in traditional sort of whatever you want to call coursework or sessions that teachers are taking part in, I think that there's tremendous potential in having teachers practice and get feedback from their peers. We have rich, research around the power of lesson rehearsals and lesson studies, and even just practice of particular skill sets, and how that can build confidence, it can build automaticity, it can unpack some things that a teacher might not have thought through. So, oh, you're right, like when I explain this, I need to order the numbers vertically versus horizontally. I need to make sure that I attend to how I line up the ones and the zeros, because when I don't do that, it's very unclear to kids. And so actually making sure that that coursework piece actually is also embedded in practice and in feedback is really critical. It doesn't only need to happen when the teacher is in front of kids.
Great. Well, let's move along. We're going to pull this poll off, and we're going to move into the next section, which deals with a little bit about the strategy. So we might have talked about some of this already, but I'll let you get into that for just a few minutes, Anna.
Absolutely. So we've talked a bit about this throughout our conversation, so I'm happy to revisit it at a high level, and then happy to answer questions and thoughts that folks have as well. So when we think about broader strategies to improve early career effectiveness, three came to mind for me in thinking about this conversation. The first, and so many of you have put this in your comments as well, really demanding practice-based preparation, exposing teacher candidates to real classrooms as early in their preparation as possible, enabling real-time practice. And really by real-time practice, I'm thinking specifically about the coursework piece. There's tremendous power, like I said, in working with peers and getting peer feedback. And then in programs where candidates are working with a master teacher, making sure that that teacher or a master teacher or co-teacher or so forth, that teacher is an effective teacher that can provide that teaching candidate meaningful feedback on their practice. And we have so many teacher candidates who might student teach in a classroom next to a teacher who may not actually be providing sort of the best model of or example of great instruction, or may not feel empowered or trained to provide that teacher candidate with meaningful feedback. And both of those are real missed opportunities. The second, requiring demonstration of classroom skills earlier. Through the work that we've done, we really think that there are some baseline core instructional skills that early and new career teachers should be able to demonstrate. And programs should be really clear about the type of teaching that they expect their candidates to be able to do, and hold and candidates accountable to that and give them lots of opportunities for practice and feedback to improve towards the level of instruction that the program expects. And then third, really teaching, treating this early career time in a teacher's, sort of progression into the profession as longer than just certainly the 5 weeks in an alternate route or in a university program, for example. Many of them provide little or no support or guidance into a teacher's first year or teaching, much less beyond that. It's so important to have ongoing support for teachers in these early years. I think that districts and schools certainly should do their part through induction and mentoring programs that reinforce some of these core instructional skills. And also as more and more schools and districts are moving towards robust teacher evaluation systems, using performance data to really guide individualized support. What we know is that there's actually wide variation in early teacher performance. And so as much as we all hear about the first year teaching being incredibly difficult and most teachers not being first year teachers really struggling, that's not altogether true. When we look at the data, we certainly see a percentage of teachers who really struggle in their first year, but we also see teachers who do quite well. And it's important that we're providing teachers with individualized support and using data to drive some of those decisions.
Okay, so we've come to sort of the end of this section, and we want to find out, Anna talked a little bit about how we bridge this gap, but we're interested in finding out from all of you, what ways do you perceive from what you've heard or from what you've experienced in your own setting, what ways can districts or schools bridge this gap between teachers' level of preparation and the current realities and needs of schools? So we'll pop up a poll there, and we'll let you respond to that question. While folks are responding to that, we can ask one of the questions that came in the registration. And as we discussed, teaching, of course, to all of us is a very important career and an important decision to enter teaching. And someone was asking about the steps they would need to take if they were interested in transitioning into a teaching career. So it's obviously a very personal decision and would follow a different pathway for different folks and depending on where they live. But could you give us kind of a high-level overview of what your suggestions are for how someone could enter the teaching profession?
Absolutely. So I think I would think about a few things. So first, Elizabeth, as you said, it's certainly a personal decision. Teaching is an incredibly difficult and complex profession, certainly rewarding, but great teachers spend so much time and energy on their students. And so the first thing I would say if someone considering it is to make sure that they're sure. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to spend time in schools and classrooms and sit in the back and talk to teachers and ask them about their day and what it's like to teach in that school, and get a real clear perspective about what it would look like to be a teacher in that particular school or district. The second is that I would think about what particular route might be a good pathway for you. Many folks who are career changers financially cannot afford to go back to a 4-year university program, but some can. And so that might be a route that's interesting. Or you might look into an alternate path program or a residency model program. So I would look at what are some different routes into teaching that are available in your area. One thing to do might be look at the largest school system in your area and think about and look at whether they partner with a specific university or residency program or even out-route program. That might be a good place to find more information. And then finally, there are websites that can tell you sort of state by state what some of the entry level requirements are. I think curriculummap.com is one of them. Different states have different entry requirements into teaching. Some states have a minimum GPA, for example. Other states have minimal amount of course hours in different content areas. So you'll want to, for any state, for the state that you want to become a teacher in, actually see what their course level requirements are and what their GPA requirements are, et cetera, to make sure that you actually have sort of the necessary prerequisites to even qualify to apply to an alternate route residency or university-based program.
Very helpful, thank you. And you'll see there the link on the parking lot for the certificationmap.com that Anna just referenced. So looking back here at some of the questions, some of the responses to our question about bridging this gap, I like this emphasis on professional learning and ensuring that there's a variety of modes of ensuring that teachers are continuing to learn once they're in the classroom. So mentoring, professional development, coaching, feedback, reflection, ensuring that PD is aligned to teachers' needs and meeting them where they are. So this notion of differentiation of PD is critical. So these are all things that schools really need to be focused on. And meeting teachers where they're coming from.
Absolutely, and I think, coming from a preparation standpoint, I often say this to districts and schools that we work with, that the most powerful professional development is the one that's in schools, job-embedded professional development that can be targeted and individualized to meet specific teachers' needs. It's always the most powerful professional development, and so I think schools and districts play a tremendous role here, particularly in a teacher's early career, to make sure that they're getting support. I think teacher preparation programs can do more, but I think we would be foolish to think that the type of support or development that we could provide should supplant the need for schools and school leaders and their instructional teams to also provide teachers with great support.
And it looks like Heidi here is talking about something we mentioned earlier on about this grow your own approach to bringing folks into the teaching profession and then also growing into more of a teacher leadership role. So kind of twofold there.
Absolutely. And I love hearing about these grow your own programs. I think that those are really needed and smart ways to grow local teacher talent, and really excited to hear that Boston is doing something to that end. I think that's a great idea and a really smart way for the district and others to partner.
And Lillian mentioned something that we all feel the pain of, having been a classroom teacher myself, the reducing paperwork demands. If there's anyone who has suggestions for schools who've done well, and taken this burden off teachers, I'm sure many of us would be all ears.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had a magic bullet for that one. But I think, I'll say two things. One, I think it just speaks to the multifaceted demands on a teacher, right? As a teacher, you're not only responsible for the instructional sort of work that you have to lead in your own classroom, but lots of other things in addition to that. It's a really demanding profession on so many levels. So I don't have sort of a way to reduce paperwork, which I really think speaks to districts and schools and all of the things that sort of compliance-related things they have. One thing I would plug from a professional development side is that there is a new MOOC on Coursera. So it's a free online course, and it's called the Together Teacher, and it has some really specific systems and tools that great teachers have used to organize their time and day. And I've not taken the course, but have heard from lots of people who have either taken the course or gone to workshops that it's really helpful in helping teachers to organize all of the paper that they receive and organize their time in order for them to focus more and more on their classrooms and their students. So there's a plug there for some, professional development that may be helpful to teachers who are, obviously have a lot of demands on their time.
Great. And speaking of time, we're running up against our 4 o'clock hour, and we want to ask one more quick question to folks. Our next question is really just an emphasis on ensuring that you've taken something from today's webinar and can apply it to your practice. So we're interested in hearing, and what you're able to share with the rest of the audience may help them in their context. So we'll put up another poll. This will be the last one, and we are interested in finding out what action steps you can take as a result of today's webinar. While folks are thinking through that a little bit, I'll talk through some of our housekeeping so that we can get people right out of here shortly after we talk about these responses. If you want more information on the new teacher project, we have a slide coming up that has that information, and you have my contact information as well as Anna's. So if you have questions that are more general to the REL and the Teacher Effectiveness and Ask an Expert webinar series, you can reach out to me. If you have more specific questions on today's topic, you can certainly reach out to Anna, or with interest on the work that TNTP is doing. We do have some forums on teacher effectiveness that are available for all of you to go and continue this conversation with colleagues across the state. So we hope you'll take a look at that. And we do have some upcoming webinars. We're rounding out the end of our series for this year. We have one actually this Thursday in 2 days on teacher effectiveness using instructionally sensitive assessments to measure teacher effectiveness with Dr. Jim Popham. And then we have our next one in December for Ask an Expert, talking about student surveys and monitoring teacher effectiveness. So we are coming up on our closing time, and it looks like a few folks have shared. So Heidi got some background. Great. Hoping it's helpful in framing your thinking and the work you do. And Nicole sharing information with teachers she works with about the different ways they can consider if this is a profession for them. So Anna, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I just want to thank everybody for your time today and your good questions and thoughtful conversation. It was really a pleasure to discuss our work with you and to talk more broadly about teacher preparation. I think it's such an important thing for our field to continue to work on and to get right so that we can know that the teachers that we're putting in front of kids from day one have the potential to really do the meaningful and hard work that is great teaching. So thank you all very much.
And I would like to, at this time, give Anna a virtual round of applause, and thank you, Anna, for your time today and for sharing about the work you do. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And like I mentioned, here's the contact information. More information about the REL, the forum, and our upcoming webinars. And finally, we'll take you to our survey. We do value your feedback and hope that you'll take a few moments to fill out the survey and give us your input on today's webinar and the entire series. And we hope you all have a nice afternoon.